Did Sony just troll Nintendo? Because that seems to be a question going around right now after a website was released celebrating 30 years of PlayStation. People believe that part of this being the sales figures with a certain update for the most successful console of all time, putting it a bit further away from the Switch and its recent run-up into that sort of territory, and we're going to go over that here today. So if you guys enjoy this video, hit that like button, subscribe if you're new. We're going to start today with this video sponsor. Today's video is sponsored by Snow Bros. 2 Special. Relive the 1994 arcade classic now remade with a modern aesthetic. Snow Bros. 2 Special supports up to 4 players, letting you get together through online or local multiplayer. Crossplay is also supported as well between Nintendo Switch and Steam versions. Play as one of 4 princes, Nick, Bobby, Roy, or Richard, to save the weather world from danger. Complete achievements in-game to unlock and play as monsters, and enjoy newly added challenge modes including Survival, Time Attack, and Skyrun. More stages and an additional world have been added with stronger bosses to face off against, giving even veteran players new challenges to tackle. The original 1994 version is also included along with the remake if you're feeling extra nostalgic. Snow Bros. 2 Special is scheduled for launch early next year, so wishlist on Steam for updates. Check the link in the description below to find out more, and a big thank you to Snow Bros. 2 Special for sponsoring today's video. Thanks for sticking with me, guys, on all of that. Of course, sponsors do help the channel just in general going forward, and I usually leave them timestamped down below to help you jump around a bit easier. But that said, I also wanted to take a look at this website somewhat because it is actually pretty cool. It's their 30th anniversary, 30 years of play, and they go through the history of all their different generations for consoles, for handhelds, and even for just VR headsets. So they almost have like 3 different avenues here that they at least explore. But again, the original PlayStation, we all know 1994, a lot of fond memories of this one. I'm sure many people have, or think of this system, or at least the games they played, and it's so varied back then that I'm sure we have different memories on which game spent the most time in our PlayStation console. For me, I just remember playing so much Tony Hawk Pro Skater 2. Like, that was it. The first one, yes, but man, the second one was something else. And then, of course, there's Final Fantasy VII here, Parappa the Rapper. But they go over some of the details with what it was capable of: 32-bit CPU, 3D graphics, a capability of 360,000 polygons per second. It's big stuff there. They even have the different variations, and they include the PlayStation Classic, which is, it's pretty funny. It came out in 2018. But this was actually a pretty impressive console transition here, this revision. They made it so much smaller. I have a video, by the way, that really shows how they did that internally, because it is pretty impressive stuff in terms of the engineering that went into it. A little PS1 screen here. There's the original controller that, looks downright archaic nowadays, looking back on it. No thumbsticks at all. It is a different time. Oh, okay, well, there's our DualShock, and actually a dual analog controller. I have a video on that one too. It's a fairly rare controller that people probably don't even know existed, so that's cool. And then all the different variations here. Move over to the PS2 though, because this is what caused a lot of discussion online, since we now have an updated sales figure for this guy. Nice shot, by the way. I really like that, the orange kind of spotlight on the logo there. There it is, October 26, 2000. 160 million. This is a figure that Jim Ryan floated during an interview, and it was more sort of just asking about like a big accomplishment in his tenure at PlayStation. He just thought back on the PS2 generation, which that was a big deal. Like, you look at the generation from the original to the PlayStation 2, I'm sure there are many people who thought it would be difficult to then return to that more than 100 million unit figure. Really, if you look back on generations of consoles, that's not a normal thing. It's like, whoa, this PlayStation broke onto the scene. It did incredible. And they're like, okay, how are they going to follow it up with their next system? The PS2 shows up and was a powerhouse from day one. Nintendo, Microsoft, they just didn't stand a chance against the thing. It was crazy how much better it did than both those systems in terms of units sold. Last we heard, though, it was like 155 or 156 million. Then Jim Ryan showed up in that interview and said, it's actually 160 million, I think. And here it is. Sony is making it official with this number. Now, it's important to note that they showed sales figures for the original PlayStation, as we just saw, now with the PlayStation 2. So this is technically commemorating the 30th anniversary. It's not like they just pushed a press release. They're like, oh, wait, guys, just in case you're wondering, we see that Switch number getting up there right now, 146 million. Actually, it's 160 million for the PS2. We just wanted to put like 14 million units between them now rather than like 10 million. So I think it's important to note that because people are looking at this and going, oh, wow, they must have found a bunch of units in the back or something, and now they're adding that on. We've actually believed that it's been around this number for quite some time because Sony just stopped reporting or really putting out there how many they had sold. There's just, in their mind, I guess, no point of updating it until the 30th anniversary when they went back and took a look at the sales to then post on this website. But they still were able to sell PS2 systems well into the PlayStation 3 life, and there was even discussion that some were still kind of selling in the PS4 generation. And in this case, they decided just to put that number out there. But it's been talked about the number being between like 159 to 161 million. And it seems like they kind of split the difference here based on some of the estimations that we had out there. And I don't like, it's not exactly 160 million, clearly. They like the nice round number to put here for their marketing and their big celebration. There's our emotion engine chip, the DVD age, big deal. It was a DVD player that sold more, I'm sure, more units than even the games at that time. And it was so convenient because DVD was massive back then when it was first breaking onto the scene as a consumer medium. And the PS2 could do it. So it's like, why buy a DVD player that's standalone when you could get a PS2 for around that same price? And it plays all the games. Why not? Console variations with the Slims, the online, which is cool, the network adapter. And I mean, like Tony Hawk Pro Skater 3, they say the online gaming, that was big. SOCOM was something else, right? Whoa. The website's weird. I have it on like an ultra-wide monitor, and it sometimes it just blows stuff up to be the entire size of the browser, and it like zooms in randomly. I mean, the backwards compatibility that they introduced, because for Sony, this was the first time they did backwards compatibility. And it worked fine in your PS2. Just take your PS1 disc, drop it in, and you were good to go. They have a lot of the highlights here for the PS2 generation, which I'm sure plenty of people look back on the system, and they probably think more about the third-party games as opposed to the first-party stuff. Like Grand Theft Auto was synonymous with the PS2 back then. A lot of the sports titles, like Madden, was huge on the PS2. But you can't undermine things like Ratchet and Clank's like Hooper, Shadow of the Colossus, God of War. Those are big-time sellers. But, I mean, come on. DVDs and third-party games certainly, I think, carried the PS2 more than anything else. They also showed off the PSP, which, it's fun to still look back on this time. This was in 2005. There it is. At least I know it. I mean, it came out in 2004 in Japan, but, really, for us in North America, we got it months later, and this was such a big deal because I remember this system. It felt like that next-gen thing because it was like, whoa, look at these handheld games and how like visually impressive they are. Yes, we had the DS that kind of had that 3D look to it, but it was still very pixelated, and it was rough 3D at that time. And look, the PSP, you go back and play it now, still kind of rough 3D, but it actually started feeling like you had the console equivalents in your hand. Like, so you're playing something on the PS2 at the time, it actually looked pretty good on the PSP. It looked very, very similar to where if you squinted, okay, it's close, right? I was not a fan of these UMDs, though. They broke all the time, like the plastic casing around them. And they did a lot of like these movies. I never really watched movies on my PSP. I just didn't. I don't know if a lot of people out there collected them like that, but it wasn't really something I got into. But like Metal Gear Solid Peace Walker, I remember Siphon Filter, Loco Roco, and Patapon were absolute classics as well. This makes it a bit easier to actually tab around. And then God of War, which again, that was one of the more impressive titles. If you play it now, even through emulation and clean it up, it looks like a PS2 title right there. So that was one of those aha moments for me on the PSP when you see something like a big console game like this, or even some of the Grand Theft Auto games like Liberty City Stories. I remember that being one, Vice City Stories. Those looked awesome on the PSP. And then, I mean, come on. One of the best systems, and it's a shame because it didn't do as well nearly as the other platforms. The PS3. Man, I mean, 87 million. This is one of the only, the only console we'll see how the PS5 shakes out. I think it'll be okay with this milestone. The only console Sony put out that didn't cross the 100 million mark. And, it's a shame because I think the system had the best UI. Like, the cross-media bar is, like, untouched. It's so good. You can, if you use RetroArch now, It's, I think, the preferred way to navigate and pick your different games in emulation. Even the stereoscopic 3D, I have that TV, and I've been thinking about making a video on it for quite some time. If you had the two different like glasses and you looked at the TV, player 1, player 2, you actually see a different display. So they did some really, really cool stuff with that and they actually tied in a TV to their PlayStation console at more of a consumer level. They did that with like the PS2, and it was like this, I think this Bravia line, but it's so rare now that you just don't really see it anymore. HDMI ready, that was a big thing. The fact that an HDMI port on the back had Wi-Fi built in, came with a hard drive installed out of the box. It was the all-in-one box, and it was certainly priced like the all-in-one box at $600. Blu-ray was a big thing, of course. It wasn't until around the time of the Slim that they were able to really turn everything around and start to run down the Xbox 360 in that generation, which was trouncing it for the first, like 3 or 4 years or so. But this Slim revision, the price cuts, and then the games that followed up really had the PS3 starting to figure things out. Just a little too late into the generation, I think, to get to that 100 million mark. And then, of course, the Vita. What a shame. The Vita, if you use it now, still feels current. It does. The rear touchpad, remote play, OLED display, and OLED in 2011. It's crazy stuff. I wonder if they highlight the memory cards. Here are the different games. Uncharted Golden Abyss, which was, we just talked about the PSP having that aha moment when it comes to visuals. The Vita had that as well. Uncharted, like if you blow some of these up, like if you put on a Vita TV, blow it up to a screen, okay, you go, yeah, I get it. That looks like a handheld game. But on the smaller screen, especially with an OLED, it looked crazy back then. Do they not point out the memory cards? Because that was such a drawback to this system. Yeah, they're not pointing it out. Which, I mean, why would you? I wouldn't touch that either. And then we have the PS4, which doesn't really feel as nostalgic, I guess, as a lot of this other stuff. 2013, but still, I mean, that was 11 years ago now. Still getting games for it, by the way. 117 million is their updated figure on that one. And the PSVR. Why not? I wonder if they give us a figure on this too. Doesn't look like it. Which, I mean, this actually would have been something I'd have been curious to see what their updated sales figure would be on this, but nothing. At least they have Astrobot there front and center, as they should. And the PS5. I guess they would have their recent sales figure from their investors. Actually, they don't. I'm a little surprised on that one. I thought they would have had that just thrown in there. Was that 60 some odd million? No, I guess not. Well, they at least have the PlayStation Portal in there, which has very much grown on me over time. And now, I mean, it's cloud streaming. That might end up being its own little handheld up there. And the PSVR 2. So, to recap, the PS2 is at about 160 million systems. I know it seems weird, and people are like, the timing is strange with the Switch climbing up the ranks right now, but we've kind of known this figure for years currently. There are threads you can check in on from 4 or 5 years ago of people going back and forth on different forums trying to figure out the final number, and they were right around this ballpark. So, yeah, I get it. Optics-wise, it looks like Sony sees the Switch showing up to the dance in like that 150 million range. And like, nope, actually it's 160 million, guys. But this is just them updating their website to go along with the PlayStation, the PlayStation 3, and the others where they have the sales figures printed right here. This just happens to be what their internal numbers are for the PlayStation 2. Just putting a little more distance, apparently, between that and the Switch for the best-selling game console of all time, the PlayStation 2. But let me know what you guys think about this one down below. When you saw this at first, did you go, wait a minute, that seems a little too convenient there for PlayStation. Clearly they're trolling Nintendo. Or were you like, yeah, that kind of makes sense based on what's been going around? And hey, what'd you think of their 30th anniversary website? I think it's pretty cool to get a lot of this information in one place and a fun way to look back on the different games and sort of the era for each console generation and what they focused in on when it came to the hardware. Thanks, guys, for watching, and I'll see you next time.